I caught my wife in our bedroom, cheating with her boss. It's the kind of shock that shakes your entire world, one that you don't expect and don't see coming. But let me tell you everything that led up to this, because the story goes much deeper than that one moment of betrayal. This story begins with Ethan, a regular guy in his early 30s, who thought he had his life pretty much figured out. Picture a guy who's working hard in Seattle, settled into a solid career, and focused on building a life he can be proud of. Ethan's not flashy or dramatic. He's just steady, thoughtful, and committed. But recently, Ethan's life took a surprising turn. Just a few months ago, he went through a divorce with his wife of a few years. And here's the thing. It wasn't one of those loud, ugly divorces that you see on TV. It was, at least on the surface, peaceful, mutual. They'd both agreed it was time to go their separate ways. They split their lives quietly, both figuring they'd be better off alone than forcing something that wasn't working. So now Ethan's on his own, and it's complicated. At first, he figured he'd be fine. He kept busy with his job, tackling challenging projects, and throwing himself into his work. And outside of work, there was his house, a bit of a fixer-upper on the outskirts of Seattle. He bought it with plans to turn it into a cozy home. Every weekend, he'd spend hours fixing things up, pouring himself into painting walls, sanding floors, and trying to make this place feel like home. But no matter how many weekends he spent with a hammer in hand or how many projects he completed, there was a lingering emptiness. It was quiet. Too quiet. That silence would settle in late at night, and the loneliness became this weight that he couldn't ignore. So, as the weeks went by, Ethan started reaching out to the few people he could count on. And that's where Ben came in, an old friend, and funny enough, his former brother-in-law. Even though Ethan and his ex-wife had split up, Ben stayed in his life. They were like brothers, the kind of friend who knew each other's secrets, and who'd been through thick and thin together. Ben was one of the few people who knew what Ethan was going through, and who understood the pain Ethan wasn't sharing with the world. On Saturday, Ben invited Ethan to a local festival. "You need to get out of the house," Ben had said, nudging him out of his shell. "Who knows, maybe you'll meet someone." Ethan laughed it off at first, saying he didn't need any distractions, but Ben was persistent. And so, just to humor him, Ethan decided to go. He figured it would be a simple night out, a chance to get his mind off things for a bit. And that's when he met Amelia. Amelia. She wasn't what Ethan expected, and that's exactly why he noticed her right away. The first thing he noticed? Her laugh. She had this big, warm laugh that somehow made him feel less guarded, like he'd known her forever. She was standing in line at one of the festival's food trucks, chatting animatedly with her friends, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt a spark of excitement. Ben, seeing Ethan's interest, nudged him. "Go on, talk to her. You didn't come out here to stand around." So, trying to keep it casual, Ethan struck up a conversation. It turned out that Amelia was from Portland, in town for the weekend, just like Ethan was at the festival to shake up her routine. She worked as a dental hygienist, loved running, and had a goofy sense of humor that instantly clicked with Ethan's own. They started talking about the city, their favorite coffee spots, and somehow, even the random things like the strangest things they'd seen on the job. Stories that left both of them laughing. And Ethan, for the first time in what felt like ages, felt something light and refreshing. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged numbers and made plans to meet for coffee before she headed back to Portland. Ethan went home that night with a smile, feeling a mix of excitement and disbelief. Could this really be something? That first coffee date turned into another, and then another. Amelia made the trip to Seattle every weekend, and before he knew it, they'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Morning runs, long coffee chats, and quiet evenings just enjoying each other's company. Ethan started looking forward to weekends like never before. But with every high, there comes a moment that plants a seed of doubt. Things were going well, almost too well, and that's when Ethan noticed something. Amelia was close to this guy named Liam. At first, it didn't seem like anything. It was just a friend she mentioned casually. But after a few weeks, Liam came up in conversation more often, and Ethan began to notice details that didn't sit right with him. Amelia would talk about meeting up with Liam at clubs or having long conversations with him late at night. She said they were friends from way back, that they'd known each other for years. Ethan tried to be understanding, not wanting to seem insecure. But as time went on, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Liam was more than just a friend. One night, they had plans to go out, but Amelia canceled last minute, saying she was too tired from going out with friends. When Ethan asked who she'd been with, she mentioned Liam again. It was like this unspoken tension had entered their relationship, and as much as he tried to brush it off, that seed of doubt had been planted. In the coming weeks, little things started to add up. She'd take calls from Liam that went on for way too long or cancel plans with Ethan to hang out with him. Ethan's mind was racing, caught between trusting her and fearing the worst. He wanted to believe her, but every time she mentioned Liam, it felt like another hit to his trust. Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Amelia, to ask her straight out what was going on. But another part of him was afraid. He didn't want to be that person, the one who doubts, the one who questions every little thing. So he stayed quiet, hoping it was all in his head. But one night, when he was away on a business trip, everything would come crashing down in a way he never expected. As the weeks went by, Ethan's worry over Amelia and Liam only grew. He'd catch himself replaying certain moments in his mind, like the time she laughed a little too hard at one of Liam's jokes, or how she always seemed just a bit more excited when she talked about plans with him. Ethan didn't want to believe there was anything to it, but he couldn't ignore how much it bothered him. One night, when Amelia was supposed to meet Ethan for dinner, she canceled last minute. "Sorry," she texted, "got caught up with work stuff." She sounded stressed, and Ethan didn't press her about it. But later, when he was scrolling through social media, he came across a photo a friend had posted from a nearby club. And there, in the background, was Amelia with Liam. She told Ethan she was working, but here she was out with him. It felt like a punch in the gut. Ethan didn't know if he should bring it up or if he should keep quiet and see what she'd say. The doubt gnawed at him, keeping him up at night, replaying every word she'd said, every excuse she'd made. He was torn. Part of him wanted to confront her right then and there, but the other part, the one that was still holding on to hope, told him to wait, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But as he sat on the edge of his bed that night, staring at the photo, something inside him knew. This wasn't just a coincidence or a misunderstanding. This was something he couldn't ignore anymore. And yet, he stayed silent. He didn't want to push Amelia away by accusing her, but the trust that he once had was gone. Every time they met after that, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his suspicions between them. It was like this invisible wall, growing thicker with each day, and yet he couldn't bring himself to confront her head-on. But then, while he was on a business trip, he got the call that would change everything. Ethan tried to put it out of his mind, but it was like trying to ignore an alarm blaring in the back of his head. Every time he saw Amelia, he felt that same uneasy feeling like something wasn't right. He started noticing more things, little details that seemed off. Sometimes she'd be more distant and distracted, or she'd take calls and step away, claiming it was just work stuff. In moments of doubt, Ethan would tell himself he was just being paranoid, that maybe he was overthinking it. But the worry was like a shadow following him, impossible to escape. He'd lie awake at night, replaying her words, trying to figure out if she was hiding something. Finally, he reached his breaking point. Right before heading out on a business trip for a few days, he decided to talk to her. They met for dinner, and he gently brought up Liam, mentioning that he'd noticed how often they spent time together. Amelia was calm, even reassuring, telling him there was nothing to worry about. She even apologized for making him feel uncomfortable and promised to keep her distance. Ethan wanted to believe her. After that talk, he felt a sense of relief, like he finally let go of the weight that had been pressing down on him. But, as he would soon find out, this calm wouldn't last. A few days later, while he was away on his business trip, Ethan was out to dinner with some colleagues when his phone rang. It was one of his close friends from work, calling with an urgent tone. "Ethan, you need to hear this," they said. They'd been out that night, at a bar in Seattle, when they spotted Amelia with Liam, acting more than friendly. Ethan's heart raced. This was the moment he dreaded, the one he tried to convince himself wouldn't come. As he listened to his friend's description, everything he pushed down came crashing back up, and he knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. Ethan sat there, stunned. His mind was racing, piecing together every moment, every excuse, every time she'd mentioned Liam's name. It all clicked, but in the worst possible way. He barely heard his friend on the phone, who was still talking, trying to explain what they'd seen. But the words started to blur. Anger, betrayal, and heartbreak all hit him at once. He ended the call and sat in silence, feeling the weight of it all. He knew what he had to do. This wasn't something he could ignore any longer. He couldn't brush it aside or pretend it was all in his head. The truth was out, and there was no going back. As he sat alone in his hotel room that night, Ethan knew that the life he'd been trying to build with Amelia was over. But this wasn't just an ending. It was the start of a journey he never expected. One that would take him down a path of anger, revenge, and eventually healing. The confrontation and the beginning of revenge. Imagine coming home and finding out the person you love most has betrayed you in the worst way. Ethan didn't just imagine it, he lived it. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound he felt before. All of the trust, the time, and the memories, they now felt shattered, scattered across his mind like pieces of broken glass. He couldn't believe that Amelia, the person he'd started to imagine a future with, had lied to him so deeply. After that fateful phone call, Ethan knew he couldn't stay in that hotel room, alone with his thoughts. He booked an early flight and headed home, his mind racing with thoughts of what he'd say to Amelia, how he'd confront her, and what would come next. Every mile that brought him closer to home seemed to deepen the ache in his chest. As he walked into his house, it felt different. A place that once felt warm now felt cold and unwelcoming. He called Amelia, his voice barely holding steady, and asked her to come over. When she arrived, he looked at her, searching for a trace of guilt, a sign of regret. But her face was calm, maybe even a little too calm. Without wasting time, he asked her directly about Liam. She froze for a moment, her eyes darting down. But then she started with the excuses. It was just friendship. We didn't mean for anything to happen, and I didn't know how to tell you. Each excuse hit Ethan like a blow, but he let her continue, wanting to hear it all. Finally, the truth slipped out. She admitted that she'd been unfaithful. The word hung heavy in the air, and Ethan felt a mix of anger and sadness he couldn't contain. "So it was all a lie?" he asked, his voice breaking. And that's when Ethan realized something. He wasn't going to let this betrayal slide. He wasn't just going to walk away. With the confession out in the open, Ethan felt a surge of clarity. The hurt and anger that had been swirling in his mind sharpened into something else, a sense of purpose. He wouldn't let Amelia walk away without understanding the weight of what she'd done. If she thought she could betray him and go on with life as if nothing had happened, she was mistaken. Over the next few days, he carefully planned his moves, reaching out to his lawyer, seeking advice from Ben, and finding every way he could protect himself. His goal wasn't to hurt Amelia, but to take back control, to make sure she knew that her actions had consequences. And in the process, he would find a way to heal, to move on, but on his own terms. Amelia might have expected forgiveness, a quiet breakup, or maybe even a second chance. But what she didn't know was that Ethan had a plan. This was the beginning of his journey to rebuild, not just his life, but his sense of self-worth. Ethan knew that he couldn't let his emotions drive him blindly. This wasn't going to be some impulsive act of revenge, and it wasn't about hurting Amelia just for the sake of it. No, Ethan wanted something deeper. He wanted closure, a way to feel like he hadn't lost everything. He was determined to come out of this with his dignity and his confidence intact. So, he started with practical steps. First, he met with his lawyer. He wanted to make sure that his finances and property were secure and that he wouldn't end up on the losing side. It was a tough meeting, going through the details of their shared assets, the house they'd spent so many weekends working on together, and the savings they'd started to build. Each discussion felt like he was tearing down something they'd built, brick by brick. Ben was a huge help during this time. As Ethan's former brother-in-law and financial advisor, Ben gave him guidance, helping him keep his focus on the future and encouraging him to think clearly about his next steps. There was no room for rash decisions, Ben reminded him, and Ethan clung to that advice. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's anger started to feel like fuel. It wasn't consuming him, instead, it was pushing him forward. He poured that energy into work, into fixing up his house, and into the quiet moments of reflection. Bit by bit, he started to feel stronger, realizing that while Amelia might have betrayed him, he still had control over his own life. Despite the anger and pain, there was something new. Ethan began to feel strength. Each time he confronted a painful memory or piece of their shared life, he was reminded that he was still standing. For every reminder of Amelia's betrayal, he found a moment where he was able to take a step forward on his own. It was as if the betrayal had stripped him of illusions, and now he could see things clearly. He began spending more time with close friends, reconnecting with people he hadn't seen in a while. Ben would often drop by after work, and together, they'd talk, laugh, and sometimes just sit in silence. They'd joke about old times and talk about their plans, and Ben would remind him that this rough patch was just a chapter, not the whole book. And bit by bit, Ethan realized he was healing. It wasn't an overnight transformation, and there were still bad days. There were still moments where he'd catch himself thinking about Amelia, replaying old memories, and wondering what he could have done differently. But each time he'd shake his head and remind himself that he was building something new, a life that was fully his own. As the days went by, Ethan's heart began to feel lighter. He was taking control, one day at a time, and finally starting to see a future that didn't revolve around his past. Ethan began to rediscover hobbies he'd set aside over the years. He picked up his old guitar, strumming it in the evenings when he needed to clear his mind. The music became a kind of therapy, each note helping him process his emotions in a way words couldn't. On weekends, he'd go hiking in the mountains near Seattle, reconnecting with nature and finding peace in the stillness around him. And the house, this home that he once hoped would be filled with memories of him and Amelia, became his personal project. He poured his energy into making it a reflection of his own spirit. He painted the walls new colors, rearranged the furniture, and turned it into a place that felt truly his. Every nail he hammered, every picture he hung, felt like another step forward. There were moments where the sadness crept in, but they became fewer, and the happiness in his new life started taking over. Friends and family noticed the change too. They could see that Ethan wasn't just moving on, he was thriving. By now, Ethan was no longer haunted by his past. He'd reached a place of acceptance, understanding that what had happened with Amelia was part of his journey, but not his destination. He found strength within himself that he didn't know he had. And with that strength came the realization that he was truly ready to move forward, leaving the pain behind. One day, as Ethan was organizing his study, he found an old journal he hadn't opened in years. Flipping through its pages, he saw notes from his younger days, his dreams, his goals, the things he once imagined he'd achieve. It was a powerful reminder of who he was before all of this. He'd lost sight of some of his dreams along the way, but now, as he read through those pages, he felt inspired to revisit them. He started writing again, filling page after page with new goals, hopes, and reflections on everything he'd learned through this experience. In a way, the journal became a safe space where he could pour out his thoughts and track his growth. It was a quiet reminder that he was capable of building a life he loved, even without anyone else by his side. Through this, Ethan didn't just find closure, he found a renewed purpose. With each day, he felt more grounded and more connected to the person he was becoming. He was no longer defined by betrayal or heartbreak. He was defined by his resilience, his determination to find joy again, and the strength to face life on his own terms. As the months went by, Ethan began feeling lighter and freer than he ever expected. He'd wake up each day with a sense of excitement, knowing he was in control of his own happiness. The small rituals he'd established, journaling, playing guitar, and setting new goals, had become his anchors. Eventually, Ethan realized that his story wasn't defined by betrayal or loss. It was defined by growth, by the choices he made to stand strong in the face of heartbreak. Looking back, he could see just how far he'd come, from that devastating moment of betrayal to a place of peace and gratitude. Friends noticed the change too. He was happier and more present, and there was a calm confidence about him that hadn't been there before. Ethan had moved on not only from Amelia's betrayal, but from everything that once held him back. As he stood in his now finished home, a place he transformed from top to bottom, he felt ready to welcome new possibilities and embrace a future that he created on his own. One evening, Ethan sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the Seattle skyline. It struck him how different he felt now. Months ago, he was broken, weighed down by the hurt and anger. But tonight, he felt a peace he hadn't known in a long time. He realized that healing wasn't just about moving past the pain. It was about rediscovering himself. He thought back on his journey, the ups and downs, and felt proud of how far he'd come. Life was full of unexpected twists, and while he couldn't control everything that happened to him, he could control how he responded. And he chose to respond with resilience, self-respect, and a deep commitment to his own happiness. At that moment, Ethan felt ready to close the chapter for good. His journey through heartbreak, betrayal, and self-recovery had transformed him, teaching him lessons he'd carry for the rest of his life. The past was behind him, and the future was his to shape. And with a quiet smile, he stepped back inside his home, ready for whatever came next. Rebuilding and self-discovery. After the storm of emotions, after the anger, the heartbreak, and the confrontation, Ethan was left with a blank slate. For the first time in a long time, he had no ties to hold him back, no expectations to meet. He could finally focus on himself, his goals, and the things that truly mattered to him. At first, the silence felt strange. Coming home to an empty house each day was like staring into an echo of his past. The house, once full of dreams he'd shared with someone else, now felt like it was waiting for him to give it new meaning. It was time to make this space his own. One weekend, he took a bold step. He went through every room, removing old photos, mementos, and anything that felt like it belonged to a life he'd left behind. Some memories were harder to part with than others, but with each item he let go of, he felt a bit lighter. His house was transforming into a place that was fully, undeniably his. He didn't stop there. Ethan wanted to reshape his life entirely, to fill it with things that brought him peace and joy. He started picking up hobbies he'd always wanted to try but never had the chance to pursue. Gardening, cooking, even a woodworking class. All of these became ways for him to rebuild, not just his home, but himself. And that's when Ethan realized he wasn't just healing from a breakup. He was discovering a version of himself he hadn't met before. Ethan's friends and family began noticing the changes too. Ben especially could see the transformation in Ethan's face, his demeanor, and the way he carried himself. It was as if a weight had lifted, leaving behind a version of Ethan who was more confident and more self-assured. He didn't talk about the past as much, and when he did, it was with a sense of acceptance rather than bitterness. Ethan's weekends became something of a ritual. He'd wake up early, head out to the local farmer's market to pick up fresh ingredients and spend the morning preparing meals he'd enjoy throughout the week. Cooking became his therapy, a way to be present in the moment, creating something beautiful for himself. Through each of these small acts, Ethan was building a new life, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't focused on what he'd lost. He was focused on what he was gaining, a deeper understanding of himself, a sense of purpose, and an appreciation for his own company. Ethan began exploring parts of Seattle he'd never taken the time to enjoy. He'd spend Saturday afternoons visiting art galleries, stopping by small cafes, or simply taking long walks through the city's parks. Each new experience felt like reclaiming a part of himself he'd forgotten. One afternoon, he stumbled upon a small bookstore tucked away on a quiet street. Inside, he found a section on travel, and as he flipped through the pages of a guidebook on Japan, he felt a spark of inspiration. He'd always wanted to travel, to see new places and experience new cultures. Why not now? He was free, unattached, and had the time to go anywhere he wanted. That night, he sat down with his journal and made a list of all the places he wanted to visit. It felt like setting goals not just for travel, but for his life. A promise to himself to embrace new adventures, to keep moving forward, and never settle. In those moments, Ethan realized that he wasn't just healing from a breakup. He was building a life filled with purpose, freedom, and the kind of joy that came from knowing he was truly living for himself. And as each day passed, the pain of the past faded, replaced by a deep gratitude for the life he was creating. As Ethan's journey continued, he discovered the power of saying yes to new experiences. One day, a friend invited him to join a weekend hiking group. At first, he hesitated. He'd never been an outdoor enthusiast, and the idea of meeting a new group of people was a bit intimidating. But something in him urged him to go. He packed his gear and headed out to the trail that Saturday morning, unsure of what to expect. The experience was incredible. Being out in nature, surrounded by mountains and trees, breathing in the fresh air. It was as if he was shedding the last remnants of his past. Each step felt like a release, and by the time he reached the summit, he felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in a long time. Ethan started saying yes more often after that. Whether it was joining friends for a concert, trying a new hobby, or just venturing out to places he'd never explored, he embraced each opportunity. And with every new experience, he felt himself growing, building a life that was full of rich, diverse memories. As the months passed, Ethan's confidence grew. He started setting bigger goals, challenging himself in ways he never thought possible. One of his biggest milestones was when he signed up for a local charity run, a decision that symbolized his commitment to moving forward. Training for the run became a daily ritual, something that gave him structure, purpose, and a clear goal to work toward. On the day of the race, Ethan stood among hundreds of others, feeling a sense of unity and excitement. As he ran through the streets of Seattle, he realized that this wasn't just a race, it was a celebration of how far he'd come. Crossing that finish line was more than just completing a race, it was a powerful moment of triumph over his past, a declaration that he was strong and capable of anything. After the race, Ethan found himself surrounded by friends who'd come to support him. Their cheers and encouragement reminded him that he wasn't alone on this journey, and that he was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about his happiness and growth. In that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. With each new goal he set, Ethan began to feel unstoppable. The more he pushed himself, the more he discovered strengths he hadn't known he had. He even took up public speaking, something that had once terrified him, by volunteering to give a talk at a local community event. It was a small gathering, just a few dozen people, but for Ethan, it was a huge step forward. Standing in front of that audience, he spoke about his journey, about resilience, about finding strength in the face of heartbreak, and about learning to build a life that feels true to who you are. He shared his story not as a victim, but as someone who had taken control of his destiny. The applause that filled the room after his talk was more than just approval. It felt like the closing of a chapter. That night, he looked back on everything he'd overcome and realized he was proud of himself. Proud of his courage, his resilience, and the life he'd created. The pain that had once felt unbearable now felt like a distant memory, something that had shaped him but no longer defined him. As he continued to grow, Ethan found himself drawn to helping others who were going through similar struggles. He joined a local support group, where he shared his experiences and listened to other stories. It was a way to give back, to show others that healing was possible, and to remind himself of how far he'd come. Through the group, Ethan met people who had also been through heartbreak and loss. He was inspired by their stories of resilience, and in turn, he became a source of inspiration for them. This community became a place where he could share his strength and encouragement, a reminder that no one has to go through tough times alone. Helping others became a new passion for Ethan, one that filled him with purpose and joy. He realized that, even in the most painful experiences, there was an opportunity to create something positive, to find meaning in the journey, and to use his story to lift others up. Ethan's life had transformed, and it was no longer just about healing from the past. Now, it was about fully embracing the present and looking forward to the future. He started taking on projects he always wanted to try, building furniture for his home, creating a garden in his backyard, and even learning to play new songs on his guitar. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, added to his sense of fulfillment. He realized that happiness wasn't about the big dramatic changes. It was in the small, quiet moments. The satisfaction of a project well done, the peace of sitting in his garden, the joy of a new melody. These moments made his life feel rich and complete. One day, while watching the sunset from his porch, Ethan took a deep breath and reflected on his journey. He knew he was a different person now, stronger, more self-assured, and grateful for everything he'd been through. The struggles had shaped him, but they no longer defined him. He was ready to live his life on his own terms, to find joy in every day, and to embrace whatever came next. Ethan's journey had come full circle. Where he once saw heartbreak, he now saw strength. Where he once felt anger, he now felt peace. He realized that every challenge he'd faced had led him to this place, a place of self-assurance and contentment. And as he looked around his home, now filled with things he'd chosen, memories he'd created, and dreams he pursued, he felt deeply proud of the person he'd become. One evening as he was journaling, he wrote down a simple truth: "I am enough." Those words reflected everything he'd learned, every moment he'd lived, and every step he'd taken to find his way back to himself. They were a reminder that he didn't need anyone else to define his happiness. He was whole just as he was. In the weeks that followed, Ethan started making plans for the future. He wasn't exactly sure where life would take him next, but he knew that whatever came, he was ready. With a smile, he closed his journal, knowing that he'd written the final chapter of this part of his life, and was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Rebuilding and self-discovery. After everything he'd been through, Ethan found himself alone but strangely free. The betrayal had left scars, but it also opened up space in his life, a chance to start over, to rebuild on his own terms. For the first time in a long time, he had the freedom to focus on himself, with no expectations or limitations. Its home, once filled with memories of a life he thought he'd share with Amelia, now felt like a blank canvas, waiting for him to make it his own. Ethan started small. He cleared out every room, removing reminders of the past. Each item he let go of felt like lifting a weight off his shoulders. It wasn't just about cleaning. It was about reclaiming his space, making it a place that truly felt like his. The emptiness he'd felt began to fill with a quiet sense of accomplishment. This was his life to rebuild, and every small change he made reflected his journey forward. With each new project, he found moments of peace. He took up gardening, transforming his backyard into a green oasis. He spent hours in the kitchen, teaching himself new recipes, finding comfort in the simple acts of creating and nourishing himself. Bit by bit, he was building a home that reflected who he was becoming, a place that felt like his sanctuary. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't just about moving on from the past. This was about building a new life, a new version of himself. Ethan's friends and family noticed the change too. Ben, his former brother-in-law and closest friend, could see the transformation in Ethan's eyes, in his posture, in the way he spoke about his plans for the future. The man who had once seemed weighed down by heartbreak now carried himself with quiet confidence. He wasn't dwelling on what he'd lost. He was focused on what he was building. Weekends became Ethan's time for himself. He'd visit Seattle's markets, picking up fresh ingredients for meals he prepared just for himself. Cooking became more than a task. It was a celebration of his independence, a reminder that he could create joy out of simple things. He found fulfillment in these small, intentional acts, feeling more grounded and more connected to himself than he ever had. But it wasn't just about enjoying his own company. Ethan started exploring more of the city, wandering through parks and art galleries, discovering places he'd never taken the time to visit. Each new experience felt like reclaiming a part of himself that he'd lost along the way. Ethan's journey of rediscovery was filled with firsts. He joined a local hiking group, stepping outside his comfort zone and challenging himself in new ways. The fresh air, the trails, and the camaraderie of being part of a group helped him shed the last remnants of his old life. Hiking became a way for him to ground himself, feel connected to nature, and find clarity with each step he took. One weekend, they reached a peak with a breathtaking view of the city below. Ethan stood there looking out over the landscape and felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. It was more than just reaching the summit. It was proof that he could face challenges and overcome them. He was no longer defined by his past or his pain. Standing at the top of that mountain, he felt strong, capable, and ready for whatever came next. The more he pushed himself, the more he realized he was growing. He began saying yes to invitations he might have once declined. Dinners with friends, local events, even taking a pottery class. Each new experience added layers to his life, making it richer and more vibrant. He was no longer just surviving. He was thriving. One of Ethan's favorite new rituals became his Sunday morning coffee runs. He'd pick a different coffee shop each week, exploring the hidden gems around Seattle. These moments, sipping coffee and watching the world go by, became his quiet celebrations of independence. He no longer felt the need to rush or to fill the silence. He was content, truly at peace with himself. Ethan also took up journaling again. Every night, he'd sit down with a pen and write about his day, his thoughts, and his dreams for the future. At first, it was just a way to reflect, but over time, it became a powerful tool for self-discovery. Through his writing, he could see his growth laid out on the page, the gradual transformation from a man grieving his past to someone who was eager for what lay ahead. His journal became a map of his journey, capturing every step, every lesson, and every victory. And on tough days, he'd flip back through the pages, finding strength in his own words, a reminder of how far he'd come and how much he'd overcome. Ethan's life began to feel rich with purpose. He found fulfillment not only in his routines but also in moments of spontaneity, joining a friend's weekend road trip, taking a dance class, and even signing up for a cooking workshop. Each new experience made him feel more alive and more connected to the world around him. One evening, while sitting on his porch, Ethan reflected on everything he'd achieved since the breakup. He thought about the house he transformed, the relationships he'd nurtured, and the hobbies that had become an essential part of his life. The journey wasn't always easy, but looking back, he realized it had been worth every step. He'd come to understand that happiness wasn't something he needed to chase. It was something he could create, day by day, through the choices he made and the life he built. With a deep breath, Ethan felt a sense of peace and wholeness that he hadn't known before. With each passing day, Ethan's confidence grew. He started setting goals he once thought were out of reach, planning for a future that was fully his own. One of his dreams was to travel, to explore new places, and to experience life beyond Seattle. He decided that he would start saving for a trip, a reward to himself for all the hard work he'd done to rebuild his life. Ethan began researching places he wanted to visit, filling his journal with travel ideas and inspiration. Just the thought of venturing out into the world on his own filled him with excitement. He was no longer afraid of being alone. He saw it as an opportunity for self-discovery, a chance to experience life in a new way. As his plans took shape, he felt a renewed sense of adventure and optimism. It wasn't just about seeing new places. It was about celebrating the person he'd become, someone who could face any challenge with resilience and joy. Ethan's journey was far from over, but he knew that wherever it led, he was ready. Looking back, Ethan realized that every challenge, every heartbreak, had shaped him into the person he was now. He felt grateful, not for the pain, but for the strength and resilience it had helped him find. His life was richer, more meaningful, filled with memories he'd created on his own. One afternoon, he sat in his garden, surrounded by the plants he'd nurtured and the beauty he cultivated. This was his sanctuary, a symbol of his journey, a place that reflected his heart and spirit. As he looked around, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, a quiet joy that came from knowing he was whole, that he'd built this life for himself. For the first time, Ethan didn't just feel like he was moving forward, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan's journey had taught him that real strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up, again and again. He understood now that life's toughest moments often lead to the most profound growth. The man he was becoming wasn't defined by his past, but by the choices he made every day to live fully, freely, and with gratitude. One evening, as the sun set over Seattle, Ethan took a quiet walk through his neighborhood. He felt at home, not just in the city but in his own skin. The doubts, the heartbreak, all of it felt like distant memories. He'd grown beyond them, transformed by his journey, and filled with a sense of peace and purpose. With each step, he felt a deep appreciation for his path. Life had thrown him challenges, but he'd found his way through, and now he was ready for whatever lay ahead. Ethan wasn't just surviving, he was thriving, and he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. With every passing day, Ethan felt more aligned with his purpose. He found peace in the simple, everyday moments, walking through his garden, exploring his neighborhood, and journaling each night. These small acts, once just routines, had become rituals of gratitude, grounding him in the present and giving him hope for the future. One weekend, he planned a quiet celebration, a toast to the new life he'd built. He invited his closest friends, the people who had been there through it all, and as they gathered in his home, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was his community, his chosen family, a reflection of the person he'd become. Looking around the room, Ethan realized he was truly happy. The man he saw in the mirror was strong, resilient, and at peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought him to a place of wholeness. And as he raised his glass that night, he knew one thing for certain: the best was yet to come. Finding closure. Ethan's journey hadn't just been about healing from betrayal. It had been about rediscovering himself, understanding what truly mattered, and finding a sense of peace he'd never known before. As he reflected on everything he'd been through, he felt a quiet sense of pride. The pain, the struggle, the growth, it had all led him to a place of wholeness. He took some time to think about the people who had stood by him throughout it all. His close friends, family, and especially Ben, who'd been like a brother to him through every high and low. Ethan realized that their support had been a crucial part of his journey, helping him find the strength to keep going even on the darkest days. One evening, Ethan invited them over for a small dinner, a way to show his gratitude. As they gathered around his table, sharing stories and laughter, he felt an overwhelming sense of connection and gratitude. These were the people who had helped him rebuild, and he wanted them to know just how much they meant to him. And it was in that moment that Ethan realized he was finally free. Free from the past, free from the pain, and free to start living life on his own terms. With every passing day, Ethan felt lighter. The weight of his past was gone, replaced by a calm acceptance of everything that had happened. He no longer felt haunted by memories or regrets. Instead, he felt grateful for the lessons they had brought him. He began looking forward with a clear heart, excited about the life he was building. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught him resilience, self-worth, and the importance of surrounding himself with people who truly cared. He knew now that happiness wasn't something that could be taken away by someone else's actions. It was something he could create and protect, no matter what. Ethan's life was his again, and he felt ready to embrace every moment of it. One of the most powerful moments of closure came when Ethan finally sat down to write a letter. It wasn't a letter he planned to send, but one he needed to write for himself. In it, he poured out everything he'd felt, everything he'd gone through, and all the lessons he'd learned. He thanked the past for the strength it had given him, for the resilience he had built. This letter became a symbolic release. As he finished the last words, he felt as if he'd closed a chapter of his life, locking away the pain but keeping the wisdom it had given him. He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it away in his journal, a reminder of where he'd been, how far he'd come. In the following days, Ethan found himself smiling more, laughing freely, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. He was no longer weighed down by what had happened. Instead, he was looking forward to new adventures, new memories, and a life that was fully his. With his heart finally at peace, Ethan began to explore dreams he put on hold for years. He started planning a solo trip, a journey to see places he'd always wanted to visit, but never had the chance to. The idea of traveling on his own felt symbolic, a way to celebrate his independence and his newfound sense of freedom. As he mapped out his itinerary, he felt an excitement that reminded him of his younger self, the version of him that believed anything was possible. This trip wasn't about escaping his past, it was about embracing his future, about setting out into the world with a clear mind and an open heart. Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of the life he was creating, one filled with purpose, joy, and a deep sense of inner strength. He had turned the pain into power, the heartbreak into hope, and now he was ready to move forward fully. Ethan spent the next few weeks preparing for his trip. He filled his journal with travel plans, sketches of the places he'd visit, and notes of the experiences he wanted to have. It wasn't just a trip, it was a celebration of everything he'd worked through, a tribute to the life he'd built from the ground up. The night before he left, he sat in his garden, surrounded by the plants he'd nurtured, and took a moment to reflect. He knew he'd come a long way, and he was grateful for every step, every struggle, every victory. His life was full again, not because someone else had filled it, but because he had. He'd become his own source of strength, and that was something no one could ever take away. As he closed his journal and went back inside, he felt a deep sense of peace. Tomorrow marked the beginning of a new adventure, a future he'd crafted on his own terms. As he embarked on his journey, Ethan felt a sense of lightness he hadn't experienced in years. Each new place he visited felt like a fresh start, a chance to write new memories without the weight of his past holding him back. He wandered through markets, tasted unfamiliar foods, and marveled at the beauty of places he'd only seen in pictures. Every day was a reminder of his resilience and his ability to stand strong on his own. He found joy in the little things, meeting new people, exploring hidden corners of each city, and journaling his thoughts at the end of each day. His journal became a testament to his journey, filled with stories, lessons, and dreams for the future. As his trip continued, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected, a sense of completeness. He realized he didn't need anyone else to define his happiness. He was enough just as he was, and that knowledge filled him with a quiet, unshakable peace. With each day of travel, Ethan noticed a shift in how he saw the world and himself. He was no longer looking back with regret or pain. Instead, he found himself feeling grateful for the journey that had led him here. He realized that every difficult moment, every struggle had helped shape him into someone strong, resilient, and open to life's endless possibilities. As he walked through new cities, explored historical sites, and embraced the unfamiliar, he felt himself growing. There was a quiet joy in the unknown, a thrill in every twist and turn that his travels brought him. He began to see his life as an adventure, with each chapter leading him somewhere new, somewhere meaningful. In the evenings, he'd find a quiet place to reflect, often with his journal and a cup of tea or coffee. He captured his thoughts, sketch moments from the day, and write down the lessons he was learning. Through these reflections, he realized that his journey wasn't just about healing. It was about finding a new kind of freedom. Freedom from expectations, from the need to be defined by anyone but himself. As Ethan continued his travels, he found himself drawn to nature. He spent hours hiking through mountain trails, feeling the earth beneath his feet, breathing in the fresh air, and listening to the sounds of the world around him. Being in nature reminded him of his strength and resilience, qualities he had rediscovered within himself. On one of his hikes, he reached a serene overlook where he could see miles of untouched land stretching before him. Standing there with the wind on his face and the sun setting on the horizon, he felt a deep sense of connection to the world, to himself, and to the journey that had brought him to this place. He closed his eyes and took a moment to thank the past, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. This journey was his reminder that life could be both beautiful and challenging, and that each experience, even the painful ones, added richness to his story. Back in his journal, Ethan wrote about the lessons he'd learned. He jotted down words that held new meanings for him: resilience, courage, gratitude, and freedom. Each word was a reminder of the strength he had cultivated, of the journey that had transformed him from someone who once felt broken into someone who felt whole and empowered. He began to look at his life not as something to be controlled or perfected, but as an ever-evolving adventure. He embraced the uncertainty of the future, finding joy in knowing that he had the tools and the wisdom to face anything that came his way. He was no longer defined by the past, by heartbreak, or by someone else's actions. He was defined by his choices, his dreams, and the person he was becoming. Ethan realized that he didn't need to chase happiness. It was something he could find in the present, in each moment in the life he had created. And that, he knew, was a gift he had given himself. One evening, as he watched the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He realized that he no longer felt defined by the pain he had once endured. Instead, he felt grounded in the strength he had found within himself and the life he had created from that strength. With his journey coming full circle, Ethan knew he was ready to move forward, no longer tied to the past but deeply appreciative of it. Every struggle, every challenge had been a stepping stone to this moment, a moment of peace, clarity, and self-love. As he packed up to head home, Ethan felt lighter than ever before. He was returning to his life not as the man who had been hurt, but as someone who had reclaimed his power, rebuilt his heart, and was ready to embrace all the future had in store. On the flight back home, Ethan found himself looking out over the clouds, feeling the calmness he hadn't known before. His life was no longer defined by the past or the expectations of others. It was his fully and completely. He had come to see that real happiness wasn't about avoiding hardship, but about embracing life with all its ups and downs and trusting in his own strength to navigate it. Returning to his home, Ethan felt a warmth in each room, a reflection of the person he had become. His home was no longer a reminder of what he lost, but a celebration of what he gained, a sense of self-worth, confidence, and the knowledge that he was enough. He looked around and smiled, feeling a joy that was quiet but profound. It was in these simple moments, standing in the place he'd rebuilt with his own hands and heart, that he felt truly complete. He didn't need anything more. He was whole, he was home, and he was ready for whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself looking toward the future with excitement. His journey had taught him the value of resilience, of finding joy in each moment, and of creating a life that truly felt like his own. He began setting new goals, small dreams that filled him with hope and purpose, each one a reminder that he was free to shape his path. He had come to a place where he no longer needed closure from the past. He had created his own. The peace he felt was his, earned through the strength he discovered within himself. And as he walked through his neighborhood, watching the world go by, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan's story was no longer defined by what he'd lost, but by everything he gained. He had built a life of his own, one filled with purpose, peace, and a quiet confidence that no one could take from him. And as he looked toward the future, he was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead with an open heart and a spirit that was truly free. Final takeaways and inspiration. Ethan's story is one of resilience, a journey that shows us all the power of healing and self-discovery. His life was turned upside down by betrayal, yet he found a way to rebuild, reclaim his happiness, and create a future that he could call his own. What Ethan went through wasn't easy, but it was a reminder that even in our hardest times, there's always a path forward, a way to find strength in the midst of pain. He didn't just survive, he thrived. And that's a message we can all carry with us. No matter what challenges we face, there's always a way to turn that pain into growth, to use it as fuel to build a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. Remember, true strength isn't about never falling. It's about finding the courage to stand up, time and time again. Ethan's journey is a testament to the power of choice. He chose to take control of his life, to let go of the past, and to focus on building something new. That choice, that decision to embrace his own happiness, is something each of us has the power to make. We don't have to be defined by what happened to us. We can be defined by what we choose to do with it. For Ethan, happiness became something he could create on his own, something that no one else could take away. It's a lesson for all of us, that true happiness isn't found in someone else, or in things we might lose. It's something we find within, in the way we live, the choices we make, and the journey we're on. Ethan's story reminds us that healing is a journey, one that doesn't happen overnight. There were days when he doubted himself, moments when the past felt overwhelming. But he kept going step by step, allowing himself the time he needed to rebuild. It's a powerful reminder that healing isn't a race. It's a personal journey that looks different for each of us. Through his pain, Ethan found purpose. He turned his experience into an opportunity to grow, to find a deeper strength within himself. And that's something we can all do, even when the path feels difficult. Each challenge we face can become a stepping stone, a way to shape the life we want and the person we want to be. No matter how dark things may seem, remember this: every ending is a new beginning waiting to unfold. As we look at Ethan's journey, it's clear that life's greatest challenges often reveal our inner strength. He learned that while he couldn't control what happened to him, he could control how he responded. And that choice, to keep moving forward, is what transformed his life. Ethan's story also teaches us that we're never truly alone. He found support in friends, family, and even in moments of solitude. It's a reminder that there are people who care about us, who are there to lift us up, even when we feel lost. And sometimes we can find strength in our own company by taking the time to understand ourselves and appreciate who we are. Ultimately, Ethan's journey wasn't just about letting go of the past, it was about embracing the future, one that he had the power to shape. His story encourages us all to live fully, to trust ourselves, and to know that even when things seem difficult, there is always light on the other side. Ethan's journey reminds us of one of life's most valuable lessons, that true happiness is built from within. He found that happiness didn't depend on external validation, a relationship, or someone else's approval. It was something he could create on his own, through his actions, his choices, and his perspective. When he faced his darkest moments, Ethan chose to stand tall, to keep going even when it felt hard. And that resilience became his foundation, a steady ground that he could rely on. His story is a reminder that no matter what challenges we face, we have the power to rebuild, to create a life that feels fulfilling and true. So, as we look at Ethan's journey, let's take this message to heart, that no matter where we are in life, we can find strength within ourselves. We can create a future we love, and we can embrace each day with the confidence that we're capable of anything. Remember, the power to rebuild, to thrive, is within each of us. It's a choice we make, day by day. Ethan's journey teaches us that we are all capable of growth, of turning even the hardest challenges into something meaningful. He didn't just move on from his pain. He turned it into a foundation for a life that was richer, deeper, and more fulfilling. It's a reminder that our toughest moments can become the stepping stones to a future we're proud of. In choosing to rebuild, Ethan found a new kind of happiness, one that came from knowing himself, trusting his choices, and embracing the unknown with an open heart. His story encourages us to trust our own journey and to know that every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory in itself. Ultimately, Ethan's story isn't just about one person's resilience. It's a universal story, a message of hope for anyone who's ever faced hardship and wondered if they'd make it through. His journey is proof that we all have what it takes to overcome, to rebuild, and to live a life filled with purpose and joy. Ethan's story encourages us to look within, to find that unbreakable core of strength we all carry. He faced his darkest moments and came through not because he had all the answers, but because he chose to keep going. He chose to believe in his own resilience, to trust that even after the hardest chapters, there's always a new beginning. As we reflect on his journey, let it remind us that life is a series of choices. We can choose to be defined by the past, or we can choose to learn from it, to grow, and to create something new. We can choose to build a life that brings us joy, a life that's filled with purpose, passion, and a sense of inner peace. So, if there's one takeaway from Ethan's story, it's this: no matter what we face, we are stronger than we know, braver than we believe, and capable of creating a future that feels true to who we are. At the heart of Ethan's story is a truth we can all relate to. Life doesn't always go as planned, but we have the power to shape our response, to grow stronger with every challenge. His journey from heartbreak to healing teaches us that resilience isn't about never feeling pain. It's about learning to stand tall despite it. Ethan learned that true peace comes from within, from knowing who he is and trusting his own worth. And that's a reminder we can carry into our own lives. We don't need validation from others to feel complete. Happiness is something we build for ourselves, day by day, through the choices we make and the love we show ourselves. So, as we close Ethan's story, let's carry forward his courage, his strength, and his message of hope. Remember, no matter where you are or what you're going through, you have the power to rebuild, to thrive, and to live a life that's truly your own. Ethan's story isn't just about survival. It's about the courage to redefine life on your own terms. He showed us that healing is not about forgetting the past, but learning to live fully in the present. His journey reminds us all that we have the power to shape our lives, to find strength in adversity, and to choose happiness in each moment. Through his resilience, Ethan transformed pain into a powerful foundation for a fulfilling life. And that's a lesson for all of us. No matter where we are on our path, we can turn our struggles into stepping stones, embracing every part of our journey as a part of who we're becoming. Let Ethan's story be a reminder. The life we want is within reach, built from the small, intentional steps we take each day. We have the power to create a life that feels true, meaningful, and filled with purpose. Ethan's journey also teaches us the power of self-compassion. He learned to forgive himself for the times he felt lost, the moments when moving forward seemed impossible. By choosing to be gentle with himself, he found the courage to heal at his own pace. And that's a message we can all take to heart. Healing doesn't have to be rushed. It's a process, and it's okay to take our time. Through his story, we see that life's toughest challenges don't just test us, they reveal who we are and what we're capable of. Ethan turned his hardest experiences into the foundation for a new, empowered life. He found happiness not in what he lost, but in everything he gained along the way. As we bring Ethan's story to a close, let's remember that each of us has the strength to face the unknown, to grow from our struggles, and to live with a sense of purpose that no one can take away. As we look back on Ethan's journey, it's clear that our most difficult moments can be the very ones that lead us to our greatest growth. His story encourages each of us to believe in our own resilience and to trust that even when life takes unexpected turns, we have the power to steer ourselves toward a brighter future. Ethan's choice to rebuild, to create a life that felt true and fulfilling, is a choice we can all make. Every day, we can choose to let go of what holds us back, to forgive ourselves, and to embrace the possibilities ahead. His journey is a reminder that we don't have to have it all figured out to take that first step. Let Ethan's story inspire us to live fully, to find happiness within, and to carry forward the belief that we are enough just as we are.